What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians, runners of all ages? Joker back again once again, and today, people, Bungie. They've had a couple of controversies here lately, and hey, with the announcement of the new Saturnine Terminators coming out, I don't mind. So personally speaking, I would like to take a moment to thank Bungie for helping me add to my Warhammer 30k and 40k pile of shame. They really are the gift that keeps on giving. But in today's episode of As the Bungie Burns, it seems Marathon may have been more than Bungie can chew, but you know what they say, look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. So for those of you who are not up to date on the latest and greatest Bungie drama, ever since the reveal of Marathon, Bungie has found themselves in one controversy after another. To put it mildly, the game that they showed off looked undercooked.
It's not undercooked, it's raw! It's fucking raw!
During the reveal, they seemed way more concerned with showing off their avant-garde, artsy-fartsy little film. Instead of, you know, a wild idea here, let's get a little crazy.
Now you wanna get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
Informing us about the fucking game. In fact, most of the things that we learned coming out of the reveal were revealed to us not by Bungie, but by content creators. And I know I've talked about some of this stuff before, but every video is somebody's first, so please bear with me as I go over some of the more important bullet points. For starters, Bungie revealed that they wanted to build the game with their community. As a longtime Destiny player, I know that means waiting 10 years to get basic features in an MMORPG. We learned that Marathon wouldn't have proximity chat because Bungie viewed that as potentially toxic. You know what else is potentially toxic? A mildly pointy hat in a video game, but they had no problem adding that. It's almost like people are going to abuse things in video games regardless of what the developer's best intention is. And just because I know there will be people who don't even know how to contemplate the existence of breakfast, I'm saying you shouldn't develop your game like a nanny terrified that the kids are going to do something wrong. All you can do, or realistically should do, is develop features that can be used to punish bad actors. You shouldn't just take your ball and go home because somebody might throw it a little too hard at little Timmy's head. Then again, this is the company that had people on record equating teabagging to SA. But I digress. So, other things that content creators told us from the reveal were things like, the story hadn't been written yet.
Story is another big gap right now. Bungie were very upfront about the fact that they've built the narrative framework for Marathon. They haven't written the actual narrative yet.
We learned that the ranked mode that was supposed to revolutionize the genre was little more than ideas in some dude's head.
They're 5 months out, and one of the two revolutionary things that they're talking about hasn't been built yet. I'm starting to get the feeling, and this was paired with some of the other stuff that I heard, where they kept saying, like, we're still early, so please provide us your feedback so that we can make improvements and tweak it. They're 5 months out. They're really not that early. And this game has been in production for 6 years. 6.
That's all rough in and of itself, but maybe, just maybe, Marathon's one of those games that you have to play it to really understand it. And so the alpha came and the alpha went, and everybody loved— oh wait, no, that's not what happened. The numbers for people both watching it and playing it dropped off almost instantly. But Joker, I hear you cry out in your shrill, tremulous voice, Expedition 33, Oblivion, there were games that people were more interested in. Yeah, but I don't think it was Expedition 33 or Oblivion, because we were treated to something special during the Marathon Alpha, the categorical execution of Marathon by Arc Raiders.
What is dead may never die!
Another extraction shooter that came out during the same time Marathon was having a tech test, and well, saying it sucked all the air out of the room and ate Marathon's lunch almost seems like an understatement. And if that wasn't bad enough, the proverbial bottom fell out, and accusations, which turned into confirmations of plagiarism, arose. This then led to a live stream that somebody, not me, of course, but somebody, hypothetically allegedly, might uncharitably characterize as a technologically inept humiliation ritual caught in 4K and live streamed for the rest of us.
Walk out the door, you see someone that you know and they ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And this is before we learn things like the morale at the studio is in free fall, or that Marathon had to be one of the top 5 selling games in 2025 to even be considered a success.
You serious?
which more than likely wasn't going to happen before the reveal, and sure as shit isn't going to happen now. I don't care if they make Glitch barefoot with her big naturals flopping around like she just got the first Descendant update. It's not going to happen. And yet, somehow, it managed to get even worse, or better, you know, depending on where you stand. According to reporting done by Paul Tassi, at the start of the month, Bungie pulled the plug on Marathon's main marketing plan, which was going to have new trailers in June, along with the launch of pre-orders and a whole campaign. There was going to be a heavily marketed public beta in August, which may now be changed to roadmap of public tests, with no actual details set yet. Well, that may have changed, at least according to reporting done by the Game Post. Quoting, Sony reportedly cancels all paid marketing for Marathon. Delay incoming? ? Now, a report claims that Sony has canceled all paid marketing plans for Marathon. This information comes from Colin Moriarty, who shared the news in the latest paywalled episode of the Sacred Symbol Plus podcast. This reportedly comes from somebody familiar with the marketing efforts in an overseas market, and is considered, quote, a fairly unusual move for a game of this high profile. I was told by somebody familiar with marketing plans in a key overseas market that there are now no plans to do paid marketing for Marathon at all, Moriarty said during the podcast. I don't know if these plans were affected by what has recently happened, or if that was always the plan, or whatever, but it is considered a fairly unusual move for a game of this high profile. With everything going on, the art plagiarism controversy, mixed to negative feedback from the closed alpha, and now no paid marketing plans from Sony, it's hard not to see a delay on the horizon. Pushing forward with the planned September 23rd launch could honestly make things even worse for Bungie and Marathon. Clearly, there's a lot to unpack there, but first things first. Contrary to what a lot of people have been reporting, Marathon, in and of itself, has not been canceled at time of recording. The second piece of information I think it's important to understand is Colin Moriarty says, well, a guy told me. It is very much a case of, trust me, bro. Now, to be clear, that's not me saying he's lying about it either. It's just saying, hey, take this with a grain of salt before we get all excited. And the last thing to keep in mind, as Colin states, he doesn't know whether or not this was the plan all along. Now, this is abnormal, but abnormal doesn't mean it hasn't happened before. Though, truth be told, I'm personally struggling to even think of an example where I've heard rumors that this may have happened. Like, for instance, Halo Infinite was shown off and it was more or less panned by everyone and their mother. So the game got delayed, they hired Joseph Staten as a publicity stunt, but a lot of the cross-promotional marketing was already in the works well before the delay. You would think that with a first-party published by Sony, AAA title like Marathon that is expected to break into the top 5 NPD, the creation of trailers, cross-promotion, things that get this product out into the cultural zeitgeist and in the eyes of the casual player or whatever, whomever their demographic is, you would think, you'd assume, you may even have the audacity to suppose that a game that vital to Sony and Bungie would have had its marketing campaign in the works long ago, right? More so for a game in a genre that's traditionally not very casual friendly. So you need to build insane hype around this game. You need to get it in front of the masses. You need to get people who have no clue what this game or this genre even is sold on it in just a couple of months. Huh. Really? Oh yeah, and at the risk of being repetitive, for the game to be successful, it has to break the top 5 NPD. But what does this all mean? After all, at time of recording, there has been no official announcement of a delay, and any significant delay to actually fix any of Marathon's issues would push the game into 2026. In 2026, there's a very small window that this game can come out where it's not actively competing with Grand Theft Auto.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
So from between January to April, and April is pushing it. They, of course, could delay it till after Grand Theft Auto. They could delay it a full year and come out in September. But even then, there's some problems there, because now not only are they competing with Grand Theft Auto, but they're competing with the holiday season. Grand Theft Auto is a juggernaut, and it'll suck all the air out of the room. The question is not if, but for how long. Grand Theft Auto is a game that is played primarily on console, and will be releasing only on console. So technically speaking, Marathon does have the entire PC market. But at the same time, just to give you an idea of how popular Grand Theft Auto is, when Grand Theft Auto released on Steam in 2025, about a year and a half, 2 years after its initial release, it was doing numbers and is still doing numbers. At time of recording, Grand Theft Auto is one of the top 20 games on Steam. That's just how much staying power it has. Remember, this is a game that came out in 2013. There's a reason everybody is looking at Grand Theft Auto and going, yeah, that game's probably going to cost $100 just for the base edition, you know, because they can. And personally speaking, I will not be purchasing Grand Theft Auto, at least not at whatever the market price is. But loads of people will. And so the months that follow will be people no-lifing the game. And it is going to be a significant point in time for gaming. It would be stupid to assume that that point in time would have a 1 to 2 to 3 month fall off. More so if they're treating it like a live service game and there's loads of content planned for after release, which they almost inevitably are. So perhaps Marathon could still release in September, but both Sony and Bungie would have to reevaluate their position on how successful they believe that this game is going to be. If they release it before Grand Theft Auto with a 4 to 7 month delay, the biggest issue Bungie is going to face is showing people that it's a feature-rich product. Is that enough time to let Marathon cook in a way that's going to make it any different than it was going to be when it released in September of 2025? This, of course, is all under the assumption that Marathon is being delayed and not that Bungie is on their own and Marathon is being put out to die. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering, why would Sony put Marathon out to die? That doesn't make any sense. Why would Sony sabotage Bungie? After all, they're the same team, aren't they? Well, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians, runners, you poor runners of all ages, put on your tinfoil hat for a moment, because one possibility is a series of corporate maneuvers that would make any Cyberpunk 2077 fan look on with glee and envy and respect.
Wake the fuck up, samurai. We have a city to burn.
So, we've talked about it a few times on the channel, but the Bungie-Sony deal is weird. I don't know if you've noticed, but Bungie still very much acts like an independent studio. Sony has no say in the directions of Destiny or Marathon, which is why Bungie can even license out the IP, or decide that their games can be published on multiple platforms. Sony has no say or very little say in the operations of Bungie's studio. When you look at the Bungie-Sony deal, it is very, very one-sided in Bungie's favor. However, the caveat to all of this leniency, at least I assume there's a caveat to all of this leniency, is that Bungie has to make Sony money, which is why we can fast forward from the signing of the Bungie-Sony deal all the way to Bungie, in a short time, laying off hundreds of employees, just to make their goals. The other point on the graph is Concord, one of the only games that Bungie has helped bring to market. Remember, Sony didn't buy Bungie for Destiny. They didn't buy Bungie for Marathon. They bought Bungie to help them bring games as a service games to market. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure they like the residuals and money and profit from Destiny and Marathon, and that's why it's part of the deal, but it's not totally why Sony bought Bungie. And I think if Bungie was helping Sony bring multi-million-dollar franchises to market that were very successful, Sony could overlook some dips when it came to Bungie and Marathon. However, that's not what happened. Concord came to market and it flopped. Bad. So bad that it was shut down weeks later and cost Sony $400 million. Bungie is clearly not living up to their end of the bargain. So why hasn't Sony cleaned house? Really gets the noggin jogging. It seems nonsensical. Almost as nonsensical as this tinfoil hat, over a beanie, over headphones. In my last video, I talked about an IGN quote that stated, within the company, there's a growing expectation that senior company leadership will leave in droves in summer 2026, when the final payouts from the Sony acquisition of the company take effect. With this in mind, there's a strong push to get Marathon out the door before then, and let whoever takes the reins after that, be it Sony or Bungie, worry about how it's sustained. And that seems very poignant for our discussion, because if Marathon's delayed, it'll be delayed either into the summer when that payment threshold hits, or past the summer, past the payment threshold where all the suits are jumping ship. So they're probably going to want to get it out at the first of the year. So a 4-month, maybe 5-month delay, if there's a delay at all. And that's why we got to think about this. There may not be a delay in the works for Marathon. Now, we don't have the Bungie-Sony contract, but would it be too unreasonable to assume there is punishment clauses in place if Bungie fails to meet goals, for either helping Sony bring to market live service games or from the profit of Destiny and Marathon? Punishments like not getting the rest of the money Sony has to pay out, or the board of directors getting replaced by Sony before that money's paid out, or Bungie being absorbed into Sony before that money's paid out. Because if Sony can control the board of directors and just fire everybody, yeah, sure, they may still have to pay money out, technically speaking, but who are they paying money out to? Probably themselves. So is it unlikely, spinfoil hat and all, that there would be an incentive for Sony to just kinda sort of at this point let Marathon fail? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure Sony would have been more than elated to make all the money in the world from Bungie and Marathon and Concord and Bungie's partnership with them being super lucrative. I don't think Sony intended to eventually have to politically maneuver themselves into a situation where Bungie shoots themselves in the foot. I don't think Sony planned on ever wanting to do that. But after spending nearly $4 billion and Bungie's current, what can only be described as generational dumbassery, what other options does Sony have? I don't think they want Bungie to fail, but in the immortal words of Batman from Batman Begins,
I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you.
letting Bungie fall on their own sword with Marathon and then cleaning house seems like the most logical outcome for Sony, all while they sit around cutting marketing to mitigate the damage. Now, to be 150% clear, that's just a theory. A theory about how companies are constantly at war, even within themselves. However, if we go to the bathroom and we take out Occam's shaving kit, not just the razor, but the whole damn kit, the answer to all of this is likely nothing more than Sony saw the negative reception for Marathon and they're cutting their losses. If Marathon dies,
If he dies, he dies.
but I have to imagine there are some form of punishments in their contract for if Bungie fails to perform. Now, while I don't see Sony closing Bungie like they did with Firewalker or whatever it was called, I would not be shocked in the slightest if we see Bungie absorbed into Sony, we see mass layoffs, and we see an extreme shift in the content that Bungie makes. So much so that I would not be shocked at all. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I would not be shocked if we get the next year or so of Destiny 2, all that planned content and all that DLC, and then that's it. While the studio goes dark and they do a Destiny 3 or some other project. The reason I say this is because we already have an example of this in the industry. BioWare after Dragon Age Veilguard. The studio was culled, more or less. Not closed down, but culled, and everything that they had planned was canceled, with the exception of Mass Effect 4, which is now considered make or break for the studio. I wonder, I sit here all wonder, where have I heard this before? Anyways, those have been my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like, but only if you did. Subscribe for more. Feel free to donate to my Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous. And above all else, stay frosty.